Okay, hi everyone. Welcome to our hand tool SIG. And today the big subject is block planes. There have been some, some good articles in fine woodworking, and I've been taking more time than usual to read them because I've had more time. And there's an excellent article in there. Would you mind passing it to me? In the current version of fine woodworking, there's some fascinating articles, but there's an article all about block planes, and I'm basically going to kind of paraphrase that article. There you go. Dialing in details with a block plane. So what the article really talks about is whether you're a machine tool person or a hand tool person, what it's talking about is using a block plane to make very tiny design changes that can make a substantial difference to the attractiveness to the eye of your piece, and can just change the look of a piece. And I'll show you in something, a tabletop that I have. But so he talks about using a block plane to change the look and the attitude of a piece. He talks specifically about using a block plane to finish corners instead of instead of sanding, which gives a beautiful rounded off edge. But if you do a whole piece of furniture where all of those edges are defined by a plane rather than a sander, and even if you put a tiny bevel on them, that in itself creates a shadow line that is clean and precise and very different. And if you do that over a whole piece of furniture, then you can make a difference to the look. And there are some great illustrations. If any of you are subscribers to Fine Woodworking, you may have already seen the article. And there is I think somebody, probably Travis, posted a link on our forum, which is a link to this article. I don't know exactly how you get to it when you're not a subscriber, but I'll try and paraphrase the essence of the article. The other thing that he does is he talks about, or he shows how you do certain kinds of edges, and many of which we would tend to do on the router, but we can do something different. But very often if you just need to say put an edge on one shelf or two shelves, by the time you get that router set up and dialed in and make all that noise and sweep up all that mess and all that fun stuff, if you just grab a block plane and a pencil or a couple of marking tools, you can do something effective in a very short time. So block planes, the other advantage of block planes is their size. The reason they're called block planes is because they have a lower attitude of their blade, and they were originally created to do a carpentry or woodworking term called blocking, which is...
Well, when you say lower attitude, are you talking about the angle between the blade and the surface?
I'm not hearing you.
Are you talking about when you say, can you define attitude? Does that mean the blade between the angle and the surface?
All right, can we...
Yep.
Funny you should say that, Travis. I've always got something up on the board here. And I will try and get something that demonstrates it really well. Yeah. Okay, so with a conventional plane, such as standard Stanley plane, it has a 45-degree frog, and the blade is set down so that when you look at the mouth, is that in the picture? When you look at the mouth, you can see that you're not seeing the blade super close to either edge of the mouth, because you've got the bevel is facing down, and your blade is hitting the surface or the surface of the wood, the fibers of the wood at 45 degrees. And you can see in this, you got that? Up here, you can see a cross section of it. This is the cap iron, and I'm sorry, not the cap iron, the
chip breaker.
And here's your blade upside down. With a block plane, you'll notice if you see side view, this blade is at a much lower angle than 45 degrees. However, it's at that lower angle, and what that enables it to do is to cut across end grain. If you're going to go back to those first classes where you had those concepts of straw, you can cut the tips of the straws basically, up a clean end grain that absorbs things less than.
Not do the trick.
But she wanted to go somewhere, so she'd have a pillow. It'd be nice if she
Dallas,
could
could
go
you mute
outside.
whoever's talking, please?
Well, she can't support herself.
I was thinking of carrying her on the pillow.
So
Cooler in here.
blade with a block plate is bevel up. So here you have a bevel up blade, which changes the angle of and the way, the attitude, as it were, that the blade hits the wood. I'm not going to go into too much detail because you know how I get bogged down in detail. But in essence, block planes, and although they have a very low angle to the blade, the fact that one's upside down, as it were, and the other way is the other way up, means that the blade angles are not totally different. So in say a standard 22-degree block plane, the actual cutting angle is 47 degrees. On a regular, a regular bench plane, it's 45 degrees. It's fixed at 45 degrees because the blade is flat to that, or the bevel, the cutting edge, this front edge is flat to the front. So with that, does that make it any clearer?
It does. I'm just curious, though. They're distinctly different planes used in distinctly different scenarios, and yet the angle of the blade on the wood is almost the same. Did I get that right?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
So it sounded from your description as though on both of those, the angle of the front of the blade to the surface of the material is almost the same in either configuration, 45, 47, that's very close.
Absolutely, yes. Now, if you want a really low angle, and I actually showed you a really low angle blade, then or a really low angle block plane, they are at 12 degrees. So now you have, basically you add up your plane blade is usually at 25 degrees. The angle of that, or rather your bevel is at 25 degrees. That angle doesn't matter so much with the bench plane, but when you get to the block plane, you basically add that 25 degrees here, and then you add the angle of the bed to it. So in this case, I drew it at 22, but if I draw it at 25 plus 12, I get 37 degrees. So that's a 10-degree difference between a low angle and a higher angle block plane. Does that make any sense?
Yeah.
I won't get too technical, but if you want the math, I've probably got an article or two about it. So anyway, okay, let me just turn my view here so that I can see the camera. Okay, now we're all set up. I can see me, I can see the camera, I can show you stuff and see what I'm showing you. So I'm going to start off by showing you some examples of bevels and edges that I've already made. And I've added wax to these in order to give a little contrast. But very, very common shelf etching or whatever, a bullnose. This is bizarre, but oh, it's opposite, that's why. Okay, a bullnose cut. Easily done on the router, but it still takes time to set up. And if you're me, you have to pull the router out from its little cubby hole. But this can be created in a few minutes, and I'll demo shortly. This is just one side of this is a round off, and the other side is just a nice shallow chamfer there, which is another. You see that shadow difference? A chamfer can really make a difference in how edges are perceived. And if you've ever taken a design class, shadows and such like are really critical in terms of furniture design. And all these little things create different shadow lines, and they also create that nice crisp line on the edge there. In the
But
case
Paul,
of
just to
Oh,
be
we have a
clear,
question.
Yes.
What is blocking?
blocking. Oh, but I got distracted by the question. Blocking is planing the end. So this is pretty clean. You can see, I think I've already planed this, but it doesn't have any saw marks on. It hasn't been sanded. The edges are still nice and crisp. And it's been planed with an end grain plane. Gives you a nice clean, instead of filling it up with dust and making fuzzy edges, it gives you a really nice clean surface to work with. And is almost a polish by itself if you do it right.
Hey,
So
Paul.
that is blocking.
Paul, just a question about that curved appearance on the long side of the board. Yeah, could you turn it 90 degrees so that we can just see how it looked curved?
You
No.
turn it 90 degrees so you can see.
Yeah, exactly. So when you show it to us, now turn it upside down. There you go. Okay, so when we look at that, we see a curve. And when I read the article, I understood that to be a curved appearance on a flat edge. Is that correct?
A curved appearance on a flat.
Are you talking about this edge
Yes.
here?
Yes.
No, in this case, I haven't tried to create a curved appearance. I think it's probably a,
Oh, it's a distortion in the lens? Okay, great.
but you're right, it does drop off there. Because it's not done terribly precisely. But yes, he talks about the double taper, where you're tapering, you're doing a tapered chamfer like this from one end to the middle, and then
Right.
from the other end to the
And
middle.
it created an appearance, a design feature out of just using the plane a particular way.
Yes.
Okay, that was something I really appreciated out of the article, and I didn't realize you could create that kind of optical magic with just how you plane the chamfer to create that effect. So I was thinking you were showing us that, and you weren't. It was just the lens, so never mind.
Yes. No, this is more like what you put on the edge of a chessboard or a gaming table or something like that. So it won't bang the corners on people's elbows and so on. But yeah, you're right. I didn't do this very well, this particular one. But yeah, I had to read that bit about the double chamfer 3 times before I got it. But when I got it, I thought, oh yeah, brilliant. So one of the other things that I'm going to show you is here's not a bull nose, but just a nice gentle edge, which would do really well on a shelf edge. But it makes it a big difference between just a plain edge of a shelf. And then over here, I've done an offset curve here. So that, and this is something that you can choose the curve if you're doing it by hand. And again, these are not tremendously well done, but if you take the time, you can really get some nice effects with that. Another thing to show is what you can do to
Okay.
what you can do to a tabletop. This tabletop is originally, it's a little under 5/8, a little over half and a little under 5/8. I'm not sure the exact thickness. But if I make a table out of that, it's going to kind of and leave the edges square like that. It looks to me a little thick if it's on like a little occasional table, and just not very inspiring. However, if you take and basically bevel off the underside here, you still have the full thickness of the wood down here, so you can attach your tabletop and it's flat. But if you just bevel off a couple of inches here, you create an edge that is really as thin as you want. And when you're looking at that from normal human eye height, you're going to be looking down at it, and so all you're really going to see is the edge. So it takes a nice solid piece of wood and gives it a much lighter appearance. And that's one of the really nice things about woodwork is you can create your own custom appearance in the most simple ways.
How many strokes did it take you to get this effect? Like how many?
I don't count.
Okay.
You put some music on and just work away at it.
More than one?
A lot more than one. You'll see in a minute. When I get to the demo. Okay. I see you laughing there, Travis. I think you must be muted.
Yeah.
All right, so I'll come back and we'll demo a couple of items. I'm going to just, because I meant to do this at the beginning, I'm going to digress for one moment. As I said, I've been reading Fine Woodworking more carefully than I have been recently, and there was one a couple of issues ago that I think they lost the vision there. Just down on this, I think the HP went to sleep.
Oh.
Anyway, one of the tips that each month they publish some readers' tips, and one of them was put leather on the inside cheeks of your vise. And I bought some cheap leather. This is like pretty low quality stuff. It's a 1/4 inch thick. It has a little cushion to it. And I used hide glue to glue them onto the cheeks of my vices. And it's amazing. Things that are just slightly out of square or whatever, you can still hold them and clamp them. I've even been holding curved surfaces. It really adds a dimension to the ordinary vice that I've got it on both my vices now. Anyway, I still can't see the picture, so I'm going to just try and set up the camera so that we can look at these. There we go. Maybe I have to do it that way. Okay, there we go. So there is so originally block planes were created, as I say, for end grain, but they have multiple uses, and there are a gazillion of them. Over the last 150 years, there are so many different designs that have been created. And the thing to know about block planes really is that it doesn't matter if you're talking about something like this, which I just tuned up. It was a donation to the shop. And these, you can see them on eBay for below $20. It's a Stanley 220, pretty basic design. You adjust the blade by tapping it with a hammer or a little wooden mallet. I find a steel hammer or you can loosen it off and adjust. But it's a pretty simple block plane, but it works really nice. It doesn't have some of the features of the fancier block planes, but for just something that $20, if you drop it and break it, there's no big loss. But and certainly for a starter, it's a great little block plane. So that's the fairly humble range. Then you get some of the old Stanleys were really nicely made. This is a block plane with a skewed blade, and it has one side you can actually take off. So you can use this as both a block and a rabbet plane, and use that skew to get really nasty knots and things like that to give yourself a really good angle on the blade for cross grain. And of course, our beloved Lee Nielsen have created a modern version of it. It has a little fence on it as well, which is great for the rabbet part. The whole thing is just built in a different way, but this works just great. So you don't have to spend, I forget how much these are, but they're expensive. I bought this for a lot less. And then you have, this is probably, when I took hand tool joinery, I was told to get a Lee Nielsen 60.5. Well, not told to, strongly suggested to buy a Lee Nielsen 60.5. And I was told that if you buy this, basically you don't need to buy another block plane. And it's absolutely true. It's a superb piece of equipment. You still have to adjust the angle of the blade, how parallel it is to the surface, to the bottom surface of the plane, but that you do by hand. In and out, you can adjust, and the real advantage of this kind of plane is it has the adjustable mouth. So I can open up that mouth so I can get a really coarse cut, or I can close it down to within a very close tolerance of the blade there, and get a super fine cut. And this is based on the old Stanley 60½. Exactly, is essentially the same plane. You can buy these on the internet. This is one was donated to the shop. We'll probably be selling it in the next few days, or putting it on the for sale table there. It's a good little plane. And again, they don't cost a huge amount of money. But this guy, if I had to give up everything, this is the one I'd keep. Then you have, this is also, of the two, these are my absolute favorite block planes. This one has the slightly higher angle. It has the 22-degree angle that I was talking about earlier, but it also has the adjustable mouth, and it has a lateral adjuster that you push back and forth here, and the blade back and forth on the bed there is controlled by this little dial. And this I probably use more. This is the Lie-Nielsen's my favorite, but I use this more than anything else because it's easily adjusted, and I think I paid $15 for it at the old tool swap meet, which I don't know what the status on that is, but I will be there the next time it opens up because you get some great deals. But again, it has the adjustable mouth, so you can dial it down to a really, really fine cut. Makes a big difference. If you're going to spend any real money on a block plane, it's worth getting one with the adjustable mouth. So that's an old Stanley. It's called a 9½, and it's probably from about before or around the 1920s or 30s because it doesn't have Stanley 9½ printed on the side. Then you go to what's available currently. These three, a Stanley, a Veritas, and the Wood River are all on the market currently. They're all good planes. The Wood River has all three of these have what's known as a Norris type adjustment for the lateral adjustment. So you push the blade back and forth by moving this knob here, and then you bring it, across from side to side, and then you bring it up and down by using this knob. The Veritas has a nice little bonus that, especially for the beginner, is really cool, and that is that it's got a little screw there and a little screw there, and that will hold your blade in position. You can set it to laterally across here. It will retain it in position. Very nice little donated block plane to the shop, and we're going to be putting it into action in the shop because it's a really nice. It's better quality than anything we have here. This is a Stanley. I was very cynical about it at first. These are about $80, $90, I think. You can buy them new. It's a 60½, so it's essentially the same as the Lie-Nielsen or the old Stanley here. So your adjustment is not using a Norris style. So the only adjustment you have on this is the knob here, and then you move your blade back and forth either by loosening off the blade and moving it or tapping it. This one's kind of hard to tap into, but great little plane once I straightened up. The problem that I had with it was that this shaft was bent and the threads would not work, so I couldn't get the blade to come back and forth. But once I straightened that up and filed out the threads, it worked pretty well. These three all belong to the shop at this point in time. There is also another form of Lie-Nielsen. This is a small one, and it's really good for curves. It's called a 103. It has the slightly higher angle, yes, it is a 103. I don't think it's made anymore, but it's a great little plane for. I can't demo it too well, But for example, if you're trying to get a curved surface plane, you can plane it along the grain and leave some ridges. But then if you plane over here, you can really, you set your blade up right, you can really get a nice smooth curved surface. Something I should have mentioned earlier is the one reason for having block planes is that you can use them with one hand, generally speaking. So all of these, depending on, this Stanley is a little too heavy for my hands, but depending on how strong your hands are, they all will fit and work in your hand. One of the advantages of using a block plane is, say you're planing an edge and you've got a very grainy bit in the middle. There's a couple of things you can do. You can turn the blade turn the whole plane sideways on your edge. But more important, you can turn it around and plane back towards you without having to switch the wood around or go up to the other end of the vise. So huge advantage there. These are all wooden block planes. How am I doing for time? Oh, good. I'm not going to be too much longer. Wooden block planes, handmade or homemade in the plane making class. This is a high angle one. It actually uses I'm sorry, I'm showing you something you couldn't see. This is a high angle one. It uses the chip breaker and the blade in the bevel up position, but bevel down position, but the angles that it's cut at give you pretty much the same, either 37 or 47 degrees. So this is a low angle one. And I don't have a blade in it, but this is a custom made adjustable chamfer plane. So if you've got 50 chamfers to do and you don't want to set your router up, you can set this baby up and or even make one. But you can do chamfers on that pretty nicely. This looks like a toy. Believe me, it's not. I got this during the ukulele making class, and it's a superb, the little planes are really useful in musical instruments because the struts that make up the supports for the soundboard and so on are all very, very carefully not machined, very carefully smoothed out and shaved off to retain the maximum amount of structure whilst the minimum amount of interference with the weight of that wood. So a little plane like this, or even something like this, which I had to buy at Harbor Freight 10 years ago, and I just tuned it up. A little pack of three planes for like $10. I got it to work, but it took a while to get it to work. But they do actually work, and again, they're really nice because you can get close in on something tiny and work it. But I don't think I'll be using this a whole lot. But it's, just for today, I had to tune it up so it would work, and it does. It cuts quite nicely. So I want to talk briefly about marking this out before we move on to the demo. I swore to myself I would keep this under an hour today because I know I have a bit of a tendency to run long, so I'm going to do my best. You don't need a lot to mark things like the items I've shown you. Here, for example, is I've marked out for a chamfer. So what I did was the article mentions I'm not even sure if it mentions using a pencil line. I find it really helps. I use a square to set up the depth of my pencil line here. You guys know what I'm talking about. So I'll do that and run my pencil along, or I can set up a marking gauge and give myself just a very, very light, because I don't want it to go deep. I want to cut down to that. But just a very light marking with a real nicely tuned marking gauge. And what that does is it cuts the grain there, and it gives you a lovely clean edge before you even get down there with the plane. So when you get close, you actually plane down to where you can actually see a tiny little piece coming off where you're just about to take that last piece of wood off before you get there. let me see, I need something a little, this will show things a little clearer. So, no, it won't. Where's my bullnose mark? Oh, I don't know if I have a, yes. No, I don't have a bullnose marked out, I meant to. But this one is going to be an edge like this. So it's got a little bit of a curve, but it's not a full bullnose round, and it's symmetrical, or it should be. If I'd have done this more carefully, it would be symmetrical, so that my top is in the middle there, and my sides go down the same amount each side. And the way I mark that out is, first of all, I'll put a pencil line down the center of my piece of wood to mark a top. And what I do as I plane it is to try not to remove that until the very last moment. And that way I know that my top remains in place. And then I'll mark along the sides here. Again, with something like this, a marking gauge is really nice. And I have penciled this in because I also like to see, so I'll take the pencil and run it through the groove there. So I've now, and of course, because I had it with the gauge, I know that my lines are going to be exactly the same. Or if I used a square to do the same thing. I find that often if I measure from here and then do a straight line between it, it's not always quite right. So, and then basically marking out a bullnose would be much the same as marking out a roundover. And what I use for roundovers and other shapes, if I want something that's asymmetrical, I'll use something slightly different, but I've got a whole card full of different sized circles. And so in the case of this one, which I wanted to be symmetrical, I pick my circle and then mark this, use the marking yourself. Any circle will do. The base of a cup, a coin, you know, a washer, whatever just fits in there. If you want to do something a little asymmetric, you can always use ellipses, or something I use a lot is French curves. You buy a set of French curves and you've got a whole lot of very natural curves. I think most of them are taken from curves that are in nature, but you've got a whole mix of different curves, and you can start using those to create, you know, symmetrical patterns as well, because you can take them and you can just flip them over. But I use them a lot. One of the things he really emphasizes is using the block plane to change your design. So how many times do you look at a piece and it says, it's beautiful, but there's something just not quite right. And sometimes it's just a matter of creating another shadow line somewhere, or adding a curve or whatever. But a block plane is a great way to start working on that. So similarly, if I'm going to mark out a chamfer, as I have here, I'm going to use a marking gauge or a pencil and a square. And I'll mark, this one's an offset chamfer. It's not exactly a 45-degree chamfer. So I went about a ½ inch here and about 3/16 of an inch in here, and then I'll plane down to that. And I'll demo some of that, depending on how I do for time. Here we go. Here's the one with the bullnose. So again, I used the circle to get that. Got the, I messed around with measurements and so on. And I'm somebody, I don't like to measure if I don't have to. So I figured out that I just take my circle, the width of the wood, that's my circle. It's that simple. I don't have to go, do I need a 7/32 or a, it's, you just go for it. So, and then this one I have set up as an offset. So again, it's I used a circle, but I offset so that I can achieve a curve like this. And you can put it on underneath the edge of the table or such like, and again, or the edge of a shelf and reduce the look of bulk of it. You don't have to get all of your looks just from the proportion of the wood that you cut. You can change things after you get it. But this is an asymmetric curve in this particular case. think. I can't remember. I think I just picked numbers and then used the French curve to find. I think that's what I did with this one. Was I marked how far down I wanted to go here, how far I wanted to go here, and then I used the French curve to find a curve that was in between. So I also find this is really, really good marking tool. It's a wheel gauge. It has a tiny little wheel in there that you can replace. And what it does, you can sharpen it as well, so you have an absolutely razor-sharp marking gauge. And you don't have to spend $90 to get a good one. This one cost me $90, and it annoys the hell out of me. But it's really good for what it does. There's a couple of aspects of it that I really don't like. One of which was that it was perfectly round, so I had to file an edge because I lost several $12 blades by rolling it off of my bench. So anyway, that's a digression. So let's move on to, first of all, let me ask if there's any questions at this point, and then I'm going to move on to the demo part, and we'll just make that as long or short as we feel.
Hey, well, I do have a question, and it's the biggest question I have about the block planes. When you're getting ready to use it, there has to be a setup. And by that I mean the amount of the blade that protrudes out the bottom and how big the gap should be in front of the blade. What do you do when you're setting up? Could you just tell us how you prepare your block plane for use and what you do, especially with the length of the blade protrudes through the bottom and the gap that you choose to put in front of the blade with the front adjuster?
Excellent question. Excellent question. And if you'll bear with me, I'll show you what we do about that as we go into that, as I go into the demo, because I'll talk about that. But thank you for reminding me. So I'm going to start with the bullnose because it gives a nice result. So what one does in trying to get, basically I talked about this last week with carving, that you create a whole bunch of facets and you make them smaller and smaller and smaller until you've got a curve. In the case of this, we're going to create one major facet, which because it's a bullnose and it's symmetrical, it's going to be at 45 degrees. So I don't need to mark a line, but I'm basically going to make my first plane cuts using a coarse setting on the blade. When I start that, until I get down to fairly close to my lines, at which point I will then go to either a block plane that's set in a real fine setting with the mouth close to the blade and the blade barely protruding between, like we're talking 1 to 2 thousandths of an inch sometimes, barely protruding below the level, the bed of the plane. And most block planes, you're not going to have them set on a real heavy setting, but I'm going to set, during my demo, I'm going to show you with this chamfer how we go from a fine cut to a coarse cut to a fine cut. But it's a case of how much material do I want to take off and what quality of surface do I want? Does that make any sense to you, Travis? He's either muted.
Yes, sorry, I was muted.
Oh, right, okay. So I'm going to start with, I will start with the bullnose, and then I'll do a chamfer. And one final, before I get started, I wanted to show you something that's in the article. It's just the simple tapered. Do you see how that shadow line really changes the edge of this piece of wood as it goes along? It starts with a very fine chamfer and then goes down to coarse.
Yeah, honestly, the artistic aspect of what planing can do was the part of the article that kind of knocked me out. You know, I just didn't put enough thought into that previously, and just that tapered chamfer, it was just amazing, and it's so cool to see that can be done.
I'm going to show you how to do it as well. So this is, you know, most of us have a block plane, and if you don't, you should. But basically what I do is I'll decide how much I want the coarse end of the block plane to be, of the taper to be at. And I'll mark, in this case, I think it was 1/4 inch. So I'll mark here and here. And then I go to the point, the 0 point, if you like, the point where the taper ends. And I'll put a ruler on there and I just mark a pencil line along here. I could, if I wanted to stick to my marking gauge thing, use a knife along the side of the ruler and mark that too. But I'm not going to bother in this case. But of course, a marking gauge just won't do that taper. But that'll be my last thing, is to show you how you create that taper in a couple of minutes. So first of all, any other questions? All right, so let's get the focus in on, this vise is a really nice carving vise. It goes into a 3/4 inch hole and works very well with this carving bench. So I'm going to take, just to show you, you don't need super flashy equipment to get this. This is my 80 to 100-year-old Stanley block plane, and I'm going to set it on. I'm going to give myself a little room for the blade. Open that up a bit because I want a slightly coarser. I'm going to feel it. Feels pretty coarse already. And then I will look along the length.
I'm sorry, when you say feels pretty coarse already, that means that there's a lot of blade protruding?
Yes.
Okay.
For a plane, yes. Let me see if I can get. There's not much, but it feels. And if I look along that, I can't get the light right for this. But if you look, but I always look from the front. Some people look from the back. But if I look along the front here, maybe we can get some. I look at two things with the. Oh, I'm feeling a little. There we go. I'm looking at how parallel that blade is and how far deep it goes. So when I'm looking along here, I am seeing that this edge of the blade is up higher than this edge of the blade. So I'm going to use the lateral adjuster to make a little adjustment. And I can never remember, they all have different directions. There we go, that's adjusted slightly. So that gives me a nice, even though it doesn't look very even, it should be.
And you're not worried about it cutting your fingers when you're on it across like that?
We're talking a cut of a couple of thousandths. Very gentle touch here. Now, if I were to take the blade out and do that, I would cut myself. But no, basically, and in truth, I've always tested it by using the wood. It's only in the last year or two that I've started to use my fingers, because you can actually feel a difference. But ultimately, you find out by you test one side, giving me a very fine little shaving, and then I test this side, and it's not giving me any shaving at all. So I need to move the blade over. Oh yes. Now I've gone way too far. Okay, so let's try that again. Right over on the far corner here, nothing. Right over on the far corner here, just a little bit. So once you get these set up, you really don't want to adjust them, which is why it's nice to have a couple of different block planes. You also need to make sure that this is tightened up, because otherwise you get a false reading if this is loose. So you want to make sure that your adjustable toe or foot is there. And then what I'll do is, once I know that I've got an even, which I still don't, and we're talking 0.5 thousandth difference between some of these. When you're on screen, it's always difficult. And it never works the way you want it to. There we go. That should go. Superfine that side. Oh, so I went a little too far. Okay, I'm not going to worry about that because I'm nitpicking about 1/1000th of an inch here. So basically, what I'm going to do, I've moved my blade forward, and I'm in my adjustable toe here, forward, and I'm going to give myself a little bit more cut on that. Obviously, I did something. Oh, no, that's right. There we go. See, I've got a slightly coarser cut now. It's coming on both sides. So I had that set on a super, super fine cut. So now that I've got it to there, I'm going to do what is, there we go. That'll do me. My primary bevel is 45 degrees to create this bull nose. So it's important to have the same cut all the way along and to have your vise tight enough to hold it. I'm going to make this a little coarser for the sake of time.
Hey, Paul, it sounded to me like step one, you made
Hang
sure
on.
you made sure that the blade was protruding the same amount on each side.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you when I'm actually working it.
He said, did you make sure that the blade is protruding at the same level on both sides?
That's what I was spending a lot of time trying to do.
Right.
Now that I had it somewhat close, and I would probably spend a little bit more time. But once I've got something set up, I try to keep it in that setting. The virtue of this plane is it may not be as precise as some, but it will do a lot of different things.
Right. All I was asking was sequence. So first you made it was the same protrusion on both sides, so it stuck out equally, and then you adjusted how far it protruded. What you didn't deal with was the gap to the toe. Do you not care about that?
Oh, the gap to the toe. At this point, yes, I did move it out. At the very beginning, I moved it out and gave me some more room, because at this point, the blade's protruding enough that if I left it in its old setting, they'd be touchy, so, or very close to touching. So anyway, if you look here, you'll see I've got my 45 degree. I could probably take one more slice there. But again, when you're working on these angles, as long as you work the blade overall, you know, it doesn't really matter if there's a slight angle on that, very, very slight. I'm not making sense, so I'm not going to try. So now I'm looking at, I don't know if you can show that end where the round is. There's no round at that end. But can you show there? You see, already you can see the round beginning to take shape. So I've got what's called the primary bevel, and now I'm going to do my secondary bevels. So I'm going to leave my pencil mark in place until I'm down to my final work. I'm pushing a little too hard on this front end, so I got to be careful of that. So you want to transfer, just like with the bench plate, you want to transfer your weight a little bit as you get to the end there. Okay, that's getting pretty close to my pencil line, and I'm still on that coarse setting. So now my top line is getting fairly close to the top here. And you can see we're already getting something that's pretty close to a curve. So I'm going to do the other side. Now, when you roll over to the other side of a curve, you often get a grain change. So I'm going to try it. I don't know if you can see, but it's a little rough. So I'm going to turn my plane around. Oops, oh, sorry. It's a little rough on this edge. So I'm going to turn my plane around, do it that way. And that way I can, without having to switch things around, feel which is smoother. Feels to me like that's a better way to do it. So I can either move myself or move my piece of wood. It just depends how you work, whether you're a lefty, whether you're a righty, what bench you're working on. Or whether you're comfortable with just drawing it towards you. I'm going a little heavy on that end still. So you keep an eye on the parallel lines here, basically, as you create these bevels. And you know what I did was I marked each end with a different shape. That's why I'm looking confused. But I only, again, as long as I keep this strip with its edges parallel, what was my point? I only need the marking on one end there. All right, so now I'm going to do the same on the edges here. Okay, so not perfect at this end, because I didn't mark it, but it's getting pretty close. So now, I'm not going to do the whole thing, but in order to round that baby off, there's a couple of things I can do. Tighten up my toe there, and dial this baby back quite a bit. Well, I dialed it too far back. You know what, for the sake of you guys not watching me fixing this, I'm going to go to another plane. So this is my 60.5. This is the one I usually keep set on a superfine setting. And so now my facets, you see that's giving me a really, you notice I've got, the mouth is very close to the blade. The blade is nice and parallel, and it's barely protruding from here. It's just taking a tiny, tiny bit off each time. And you see you can fairly rapidly, and this I can dial back and forth fairly quickly. It's one of the advantages of the Lie-Nielsen's is their adjustment is very sensitive. And when you get into cutting the really fine ones like this, you don't have to worry quite so much about grain direction. You can see that's taking super fine cuttings off. And now I'll dial it back. And here's a trick. Okay, so this is not perfectly shaped. I would spend more time and attention to it if I were at home really trying to make a piece of furniture. Okay, so my facets are still not there. Now, if you're not a purist, and there really isn't any need to be, you can always, there's two things you can do once you get to this point. You can take a block plane, and you can start planing it superfine setting, roll it over as you do it. That's what this baby is really nice for, because you can hold it in your hand, and it's a very natural motion just to roll it over like this. And it just, you see it's taking just little tiny shavings there. Hardly anything, hardly anything. But you can just use this in different directions, roll it over where you think you need to make it a bit rounder. But again, you can, once you've got that basic shape, you then finish it up. And going back to one of my very first presentations, you can also use a very light card scraper to get your finish. You see it's just shaving off these super fine cuttings. So it's 5 to 11. Do you guys catch the gist of that? You just work away at it, keep your eye on it. This is obviously trying to create something that you can easily machine. And you can actually use a card to, like I can see that I haven't got it perfectly round here, so I can use the card to reshape that as well. So let's move on to any questions about the round over there? All right, I'm going to jump to the tapered.
While you're doing that jump, I still don't get, with regards to the size of the mouth, other than the fact that you want it big enough so that the blade doesn't hit it, what is the size of the mouth? What's the impact of the size of the mouth when you're planing? Does a bigger gap mean more than a smaller gap? What is the difference?
Okay, good question. We're going to have to go to the blackboard, or the whiteboard, sorry. I'm dating myself. Okay. So, as the blade cuts into the wood, we'll just use a single line here. As the blade cuts into the wood, what happens is you've got fibers along here. Wood fibers, we'll assume we're going with the grain. And when you cut through the fibers, you split the wood, right? And if your grain is against you, that's where you get tear out. What happens is if the grain's against you, you're going to start pulling up chunks of the fiber. If you're with the grain, you're going to cut into and then slice through. Use the blade of the plane as a wedge to separate that wood, right? So what happens is you're coming along here and you get a chip and it goes like that. Well, if you have no restraint on that, you just keep cutting that same piece. So if you hit anything that's a challenge, then you start getting tear out. So the way to reduce tear out, the way to get a finer cut, is to obviously, if this is the base, the bottom of the plane, minimize the protrusion of 1 or 2/1000th of an inch of the blade underneath the bed. And then when you, especially with a block plane, because you don't have a chip breaker here, which I'll explain in a minute, when you reduce the size of the mouth, what that does is, as you cut it, it breaks the chip off straight away. So you can't accidentally tear out a long piece of fiber. It will break it off immediately. The chip breaker has the same function. That's why you set it within a hair's width of a blade on a regular number 4 or number 5 or whatever, a bench blade. So that gap there, basically what it does is it reduces the size of the chip. So you take a super fine cut, and then you cut off the chip that's being cut, or you break off the chip that's being cut. So no more of that particular piece of fiber can be taken up. Does that make sense? It took me a while.
It makes total sense. It's just the same as putting a piece of wood behind something coming through a table router or the back of a table saw cut. You want to stop breakout, and so this reinforces. This is a sort of a backstop to keep the wood down so that you don't catch and do tear out. Correct?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. That's great. That's very helpful. Thank you.
So if you're trying to avoid tear out, there's a couple of things you can do. Biggest one is super fine cuts, and you can also angle your blade. Many of you have commented on the fact that I tend to turn my blades at do you mind? I'll see back here. Turn my blades at 45 degrees. That's because it reduces the amount of effort. It gives them effectively a lower cutting angle, but without reducing the strength of the blade. So, there's a whole world to it. But it's all about, all your machines are basically doing things that that hand tools have done for many, many centuries. It's just they do them sometimes better and definitely quicker, and most definitely, don't need the same skill set, shall we say? That hand.
Oh, thanks a lot, Paul. Thanks.
Right. Okay. So, no, I'm not.
I don't like the way Doug laughed at that.
It's kind of a skill set, and one of the things about using a block plane is if this is the only plane you got, it's going to make a big difference in your life. So this time I'm going to use our new shop Veritas. This is the one we're going to put in the shop, and you can see at the moment, I've got that set for a very, very fine angle there, or very fine cut. The blade is extremely close to the mouth. And because we don't have a chip breaker on this, this is why the adjustable mouth is so important in a block plane, because it's your primary way of apart from being very sharp, your primary way of doing it, of getting it. So now I'm going to create this tapered, I've got to open up my mouth a bit because I'm going coarse. Feels fairly coarse to me, so we'll see how it goes. So the key to making something like a tapered edge here is to count your strokes. So what I do is this is a fairly short piece, but I'll divide it up into fractions mentally. So I've got a front third, a middle third, and a back third. And I'm going to do first I'm going to find whether my blade's cutting deep enough. I'm going to do 3 strokes at each point. I'm going to cut just a little deeper than that. God, this is a lovely plane. Okay, that's a nice deep cut. You can see already I've made a cut here that's half the length of the wood. So now I'm going to start at about my front third, and I'm going to take three slices. 1, 2, 3. Okay, now I'm going to move back a third and go 1, full length of it, 2, 3. Keeping an eye on my relationship to the pencil line, seeing that my angle here is cutting correct. This is why the pencil lines are so useful. You know, as a woodworker, you can put a tapered line on this, and you don't have to use a pencil, but it really helps, especially when you're learning to do it. So I've done 3 strokes there. So now I'm going to come back almost to my vanishing point here and go 1, 2, 3. I'm almost at my pencil line here, and I'm within a 1/16 of it here. So I go back to my front and again do, but this time I'm not going to do 3, I'm going to do 1 and then check it. I can do another one. Okay, I've reached my point here at the end of the taper and not so much here. So now I'm going to move back a little bit and go the same amount of cuts. That's a very heavy cut I'm doing there. So now I'm going to go to the slightly finer cut, move my mouth in a little bit. Very often you'll find, I've found anyway, that when planing, you know, I like to go for the speed, but sometimes it's more satisfying and easier to do it with lots and lots of fine cuts. Anyway, very quickly, just going to get to my pencil lines here. So I'm going to start back up here. When you're creating something like this, once you get your cut parallel to the line, then you can cut the entire piece. But as long as it's not parallel, then you have to be watching it. So there, in a very few minutes, and even while explaining it, I've created a tapered edge on the other side. Piece of cake, huh?
That's very nice.
Yeah. And believe me, little shadow lines like this just add to the, you know, or even on the simplest piece of furniture, they just add something to it. Just like, you know, if you put in a, oh, what's it called? I can't remember. you know, when you put a little line or whatever at the edge of a table or whatever, where you inset the line slightly, put a bead. That's what I'm thinking. Which is a different tool for doing that. But, you know, just in conclusion, the block plane is outstanding little tool, and every woodworker should have one. And you don't have to, these are $160, these are $165, but a beginning woodworker could start and still have something fairly simple for, you know, $50.
And don't we have a few we're going to be selling for about 25 or?
Well, I looked at the prices, and yes, we're going to be selling this one. The Stanley actually retails at about 90, so I'll leave you to describe that. This guy is eBay is no, that's mine. Oops. This guy is I saw one for 12 or for starting bid 12.99, and there's lots and lots of these on eBay. You can buy them in job lots. I wouldn't advise it because looking at the pictures I've seen, they tend to be,
They're not tuned up like you've got that one.
No. And anything you buy used, you're going to have to tune up. Anything you buy from Lee Nielsen, you come pretty close to use. In fact, if you try to tune it up, you're going to do harm to it. So a new Lee Nielsen, polish it, let it go. The Veritas had been, somebody had tried, it was slightly off, but that shouldn't need that much damage. And this Wood River, which is the same type that we have in the shop same type that we have in the shop right now, we'll be selling one of those because we'll keep one as a backup. But yeah, this Veritas is just so cool. And I'm going to have to confess to this. I dropped it the other night, and most planes, when you drop them, I usually manage to stop them with my foot or something to slow them down. But most planes, when you drop them, you have to, at the very, very least, reset the blade and just, adjust it and get it back in shape. This thing I could pick up and just start using again. It's a really nice plane. So I think our members will really appreciate that. But yeah, you don't have to, this brand new is $19, I think. You can find it on Amazon. I bought it for the ukulele class, but that brings me to a conclusion. And I didn't stay within my hour, but I'm a little closer than usual.
Hey, Paul, would you say that just for convenience, perhaps an adjustable toe for the gap and a dial for the depth, and maybe something that allows you to easily shift it left and right, like those are the three basic features you'd want to have in a hand plane you buy?
Yes, well, in a block plane, yes.
Excuse me, yes.
My favorite plane, this guy, you do it by hand. You either loosen off the this wheel here and adjust it, until you can feel an adjustment, or you can tap it. I often will just use my little hammer. If it's just a tiny adjustment, I'll just tap the side of it there. But you don't whack it. It's a delicate instrument and doesn't need a lot of tuning up. But I personally find that I spend more time messing with the lateral adjustments because they all have a little slack on it than when I use something like this. In truth, if you can train yourself to set one of these up, the old Stanley is the same version of this, same length, same very, very similar features. The Lee Nielsen may be a little more stylish in its design, but they're both very capable planes. And, people love block planes. But you don't need a lot of them. You don't need to have a huge collection, and you don't have to invest a whole lot of money in them, to get a good result.
Well, Paul, I think this is one that I bought at the shop, and it was a Stanley, and it looks just like the one you were showing. It was only $25. So people should consider coming into the shop and taking a look at what you put on that table, because you tune these things up before you put them out there, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, well, absolutely. Like this one, it's not perfectly tuned up, but it's tuned up to where it'll work for most folks. Yes, it's a good source of these things, especially in the absence of the swap meet. But if any of you guys have questions about what you want to buy, if you want to buy something new and you want a little advice, it's pretty simple. Veritas or Lee Nielsen. I hate to say it. Oh, something I want to. There's a common misconception that I bought into that this symbol means sweetheart. It doesn't. It means Stanley Works, and it happens to be in a heart. But it doesn't imply, well, it may imply, but it doesn't mean that this is a slightly higher quality tool than the average Stanley. It just means it's made by Stanley Works, and their current trademark has a heart. But I get a lot of people tell me things like this are sweethearts, and they're not. And I was under that illusion for several years myself. So.
That's heart spelled with a W?
Sorry? Heart spelled with a...
with a W because it says SW.
Sweet water, maybe? I don't know.
I know, but people see the heart symbol and they just jump to it.
Yeah. This was great.
But it's a well-made plane. This one had been dropped, as I said, but it will be for sale. It's heavy. It's really heavy. That's the one thing. It's not, in my opinion, my arthritic opinion, a one-hand plane. But to be honest, I usually use my planes like this as much as I can, only if I'm pulling it towards me one-handed. All right, I think they're certainly looking like they need to tie things up. So, any further questions? There is that link to the article, and of course, anytime I'd be happy to talk to anybody about these or any other subject to do with hand tools or what we do at the shop here. But thank you for checking in with us, and thank you for staying with us.
Thank you very much, Paul. This was excellent.
I just want to tell you about our next, because I've got I think a rather special presentation for our next one on September the 12th. Ron Prater, one of our members, is a very creative, very good designer, and is a very good maker as well. And he is going to give us a presentation from his home with slides, and I think his background is design. I'm going to try and find out some more from him, but he just creates...
His backup, he's a nuclear physicist.
He's a nuclear physicist, but he's also a brilliant designer.
Oh yeah, no, for sure.
He's a nuclear physicist, wow.
Yeah.
Well, there you go.
And he still does that part-time, does some work.
Does he? All right. So I can, if I need a nucleus, I can get it from him.
Well, if you need to do something, send him to North Korea or someplace.
But no, he's an outstanding designer. His work is beautiful, and he brings a slightly different viewpoint to it, and he's going to talk about that. So we'll put out a little publicity about it, but I'm really looking forward to you guys listening to someone other than me. Thank you. All right.
Hey guys, if you noticed the production quality was better today, that's because we've got Lewis in here, stepped in and is doing the things. Wave to everybody, Lewis. Lewis is a new member and just took the introduction to woodworking class, and he's jumped in and volunteered to help out on this, and obviously knows a lot more about Zoom and video production than I have been able to do. So it stepped up today because of Lewis. Thank you for being here, Lewis.
Thank you.
That said, Dallas, you're zooming in where you thought we would be curious to see things from when you got close to the chamfers, when you got close to the tools. That makes a big difference from us on this end.
Yes, thank you.
What did he say?
Awesome. Thank you all.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks.
You did a much better job to get